I want to welcome everybody to what I know will be a very engaging panel discussion on Wall Street, the Obama administration, and labor unions, a new paradigm for capital and labor. We're all very familiar with the key elements of the canvas that is being painted before us. After years of arguably artificial asset growth and speculation, the bubble burst, leading to precipitous economic collapse. A charismatic president is elected with a mandate for change, and three huge pillars dominate his agenda: massive deficit-financed government spending to stimulate the economy, aggressive expansion of federal regulatory power over private markets and businesses, and legislative action to give organized labor the advantage in organizing workers. And in spite of it all, continued sluggish economic growth and stubbornly high and rising unemployment. I'm talking, of course, about the 1930s, as compellingly described in a book called The Forgotten Man, written by one of our panelists, Amity Shlaes. Many of you have read that. I really don't get a commission for plugging it, but although I'm open to it, Amity, I want you to know. But however, this isn't going to be merely a history lesson today, as much as we Federalist Society members enjoy reading our history. We'll be talking about an emerging new paradigm for distributing power among three vast institutional players in our economy and society: the federal government, the financial markets, and organized labor. Some say today, as they did back in the 1930s, that the recent financial collapse proves the inherent incompetence and self-corrupting dynamic of private financial markets. These same voices argue for a dominating regulatory presence by the federal government, not only to attenuate financial risk, but even more importantly, to spread and flatten out the wealth that is generated by our financial system. And in the same breath, these voices call for the revival of organized labor as the best guarantor of economic prosperity, not just through traditional collective bargaining, but through political action, symbiotic relationships with government, and shareholder activism by union member pension funds. We have four excellent panelists, whom I will now introduce, who will talk about this emerging new paradigm and whether such a new paradigm is needed and what the implications of this new paradigm would be for the rule of law, for our economy, and for, to quote Amity Shlaes' book, the forgotten man or woman or family that is personally affected by the decisions and policies that we create here in Washington, D.C. So I'll introduce all four of our panelists in the order in which they'll speak. Each one will speak for between 8 to 10 minutes, and I'm going to be a ruthless timekeeper, and it could get ugly up here, but I'm sure that everybody will stick to the time limit. We're going to start with Harold Meyerson, a veteran of progressive journalism and politics. He currently serves as editor of the American Prospect, and many of us are familiar with his regular columns in the Washington Post. His articles have appeared in the New Yorker, the Atlantic, the New Republic, the Nation, and the Weekly Standard. I've just added the last one to see how many of you were paying attention. Harold is also a member of the editorial board of Dissent and has written a biography of Broadway lyricist Yip Harburg, which I found interesting to hear. And next we'll hear from Amity Shlaes, and she happens to be here not only by herself, but with her daughter Flora, who's I think in the 7th grade back there somewhere. Hey. Let's see her. In addition to writing the book that I've been shamelessly plugging, she's also a senior fellow with the Council on Foreign Relations and teaches at NYU's Stern School of Business. She's a columnist with Bloomberg and has written previously for the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal. In 2002, Amity was the co-winner of the Bastiat Prize, and this year won the Manhattan Institute's Hayek Prize for a book on economics. She's reportedly now working on a biography of one of my favorite presidents, Calvin Coolidge, who once famously quipped, yes, I guess we have a few Coolidge fans out there. He once quipped, "What I don't say doesn't get me into trouble," which is true at home and in politics. After that, we'll hear from Damon Silvers, who I'm told unfortunately has to leave at about 1:30, so we'll be sensitive to his time. But he is the Director of Policy and Special Counsel for the AFL-CIO. Damon's views on corporate governance and financial regulation are widely respected here in Washington, which is one of the reasons why he was tapped by House Speaker Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Reid to be the Deputy Chairman of the Congressional Oversight Panel for the Troubled Asset Relief Program. Damon is also an influential member on advisory committees on the SEC and the PCAOB. He's written on the role of labor in enhancing corporate governance, the strengths and weaknesses of public company auditing, and the need to improve capital markets regulation in the wake of the recent financial crisis. And finally, our cleanup batter will be Todd Zywicki, who is a senior fellow at the James Buchanan Center at the George Mason University. He's also a senior fellow at the Goldwater Institute and a fellow at the International Center for Economic Research in Turin, Italy. I know which of those places I'd spend most of my time in. He's also been a fellow at George Mason's Law School, and the Hoover Institution has consulted with governments around the world. Professor Zywicki is the author of more than 70 articles in law reviews and economic journals, and happens to be, I found this an interesting fact, one of the top 50 most downloaded law authors, both in the last 12 months and for all time. That means he is downloaded slightly less often than those YouTube videos about adorable mischievous kittens. But Todd has testified several times before Congress and is a frequent commentator and contributor for national media outlets. So Harold, we will start with you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. There's an expression that describes what Amity and Todd are doing here, or what I'm going to be doing when I give another talk later tonight, which is speaking to the choir. I'm not quite sure what the expression is to describe what Damon and I are doing here now, speaking to the opposing choir, or maybe just here goes nothing. Anyway, the question before us is whether the Obama administration is establishing a new paradigm for capital and labor, and my response, of course, is I sure hope that it is. Because as we meet today, American workers are truly in desperate shape. More than 1 or 6 is either unemployed or involuntarily working part-time or out of the job market altogether. Workers fortunate enough to return to work, yesterday's Wall Street Journal reported, are working at jobs that may on average pay 40% less than the jobs they held before they were laid off. And full-time workers have a shorter work week right now, about 33 hours, than ever since the BLS started recording such numbers. But let's disaggregate these a bit and look at what it is that are problems for specific subsectors of the workforce. Let's look at young workers. There was a recent survey by Peter Hart Pollsters of workers under 35. So that's a pretty broad group. We're not just talking about teens. And it says that just 31% of those who are employed are making enough to put some money aside. In 1999, that was 52%. So what has happened to young workers? With the private sector unionization rate for young workers beneath 5%, and with foreign competition, Chinese competition in particular, dragging down wages and benefits, the living standards of younger, non-professional Americans have spiraled lower. They have tanked. Okay, what about older workers? The Pew Research Center, having done a survey of them, reports that 2 out of 5 Americans over 62 who are still working said they've delayed retirement due to the recession, and a stunning 63% of Americans employed from the ages of 50 to 61 say they might have to push back their retirement dates. And this reflects, obviously, the economic conditions, but it also reflects the shift, a shift fostered by capital and opposed, but usually not successfully in the wider workforce, by labor, a shift from defined benefit pensions to 401ks. From the 1950s through the 1980s, during a period of greater union strength and routinized defined benefit pensions, participations of seniors in the labor force steadily decreased. But since then, it has risen, which is quite unlike the experience in Europe, where unions have retained more of their strength than they've retained here, and where state pensions have long had a history of being higher and more generous than they are here.